Welcome to Earth Eats. I'm Kate Young, and today we're going to make a Middle Eastern couscous dish with dried fruit and pine nuts. It's inspired by a dish from Mark Bittman's How to Cook Everything. I've taken a few liberties with this recipe over the years, and I really, really love it. Normally when you think of couscous, you might think of this fine, it's closer to pasta than it is to a grain. But I like to use this Middle Eastern style. I've also called it fat couscous. What we're going to do is really build a lot of flavor into this quite plain pasta couscous. We're starting with vegetable stock, and I really highly recommend making your own stock. It adds a depth of flavor to soups and to dishes like this. You just throw in a lot of different kinds of vegetables. You can throw in ends and scraps from onions, from celery, from carrots, just whatever vegetables you have around. You don't want super strong flavorful vegetables. I usually stay away from anything in the cabbage family. You put a bunch of vegetables in some water, bring it to a boil, let it simmer for hours and just really build up that flavor, then strain it out and you have this beautiful stock. We're gonna add a few ingredients to really even make the homemade stock more flavorful. 1 cinnamon stick, and this is a whole cinnamon stick, and a few cardamom pods. In this case, we're gonna leave them in their whole pods. Any dish that you cook with these whole pods, you wanna make sure you remove them before you serve. Taking a bite of one of these cardamom pods is a bit medicinal in its effect, and I don't recommend it. This dish has dried fruits in it, and you can use different kinds of dried fruit. I prefer fig. I think fig adds a really nice flavor to this, but I'm also using a little bit of chopped dried apricot. To prepare these, you want to chop the dried fruit and then pour some hot water over them and just let them sit for a little bit, let them steep just to kind of get out of that dried state and have a little bit more texture to them. We are also going to toast these pine nuts in a little bit of butter. So to start with the couscous, we're going to put 3 tablespoons of butter into a pan and melt it. I made this dish for my friend Chuck when I first discovered it, and I was like, oh, it's so good, why is it so good? And he saw me making it and he said, I think it's the butter. He might be right. So then you add the couscous and really just stir it to coat. Just let it toast in there for a few minutes. And then we're gonna add this stock, which I have infused with cardamom and cinnamon stick. And I'm just gonna carefully pour it in there. I'm not gonna strain it. Bring it to a boil, and then we'll put the lid on and let it cook at low heat for 7 minutes, 10 minutes. You just wanna make sure all of the liquid gets absorbed and that the couscous is fully cooked. While the couscous is cooking, you wanna prepare the pine nuts. 1 tablespoon of butter, melt that. And to me, this is a really decadent way of roasting your pine nuts. I usually just put it on a pan, stick it in the toaster oven. Watch it carefully because pine nuts, like any nuts, will go from undercooked to burnt in 10 seconds. So you really have to keep an eye on them. Pine nuts are a little too expensive to be burning them and having to throw them out. Once your butter is melted, add the pine nuts. You definitely want to watch these carefully, make sure they don't burn. You're just trying to get a really light brown toasting on the nuts. So my understanding about pine nuts is that the pinyon tree, which is where these nuts come from, it takes a really long time before they start producing the nuts. And so it might have something to do with why they're so expensive. I think they're also difficult to harvest. The general rule around roasting or toasting nuts is that when you smell it, take it off the heat because they're gonna keep cooking a little bit while they're in the pan. So you wanna stop it before they burn. Okay, so our couscous was on the stove for about 10 minutes. You just wanna cook it till the couscous is absorbed. Woo! And this does look like it is. So all the liquid is absorbed and the couscous is nice and tender. And then you're just gonna stir it a little bit and add your dried figs and your dried apricots. And these were soaked in some hot water, but then I also drained off the excess water. You don't want that in there. Like I said, you could use other kinds of dried fruit. Cranberries look really nice. Cherries would also be good. Whatever dried fruits you prefer or happen to have on hand. And then you're gonna stir in. I don't put in all of the pine nuts because I like to leave a few to kind of garnish on top because you don't want them to you want them to stay nice and toasty. We'll plate that up and put a little garnish of parsley on there. The other thing that I like to add to this at the end is just a small sprinkle of garam masala, just a lot of nice warming spices. Sprinkle a few of these guys on top, bit of parsley for color. And there you have it, couscous with pine nuts and dried figs and apricots. I've been smelling this cardamom just wafting through the kitchen. Oh, that's so nice. I think the butter probably does have a lot to do with it because it just has a richness that's so delicious, and the flavor from that broth is really coming through. And the cardamom is subtle, which it should be, and the dried fruit, the little tanginess from the apricot is really nice, the sweetness in the fig. Thank you so much for joining us. If you had fun, please subscribe and share the video with your friends. And you can also follow us at Earth Eats. You can also listen to Earth Eats, the podcast, at your favorite podcast app. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.